Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. We have the shirt out on the front, and I don't think we've had this guest on since we've gone Zoomy and virtual. We're going out to Portland, Oregon, home of the free and the brave, and hopefully at some point not the home of the Baltimore Orioles in the future. We're more worried about Nashville these days. He is Bizball Maury, longtime baseball chronicler of all things business in the business of baseball at a sort of a weird time for baseball right now with the minors and all the stuff going on with the Orioles and Oriole Park and Camden Yards. I thought it'd be a good time to bring Maury back on. And look, man, we're going to talk a little baseball here, but you and I always meander into some land of Neil Peart or, somewhere where things get a little weird for us, right?
Yeah, man. And it's always the best time. And after the news, I don't know if you saw the interview with Alex recently where he was talking about how things are with him and Getty, It's a good time to be in Rush.
Yeah, I saw you were trying to put another drummer into Rush already and trying to figure out how the Foo Fighters and Rush join. But I don't know. I mean, if they go out without Neil, it's not Rush. But, look, let's get on the baseball. We'll get back to rock and roll because you'll get me all – I've been going through all my rock and roll memorabilia. But you know what I've been doing, Maury? Been going through all my baseball memorabilia as well. So I have when Hank Aaron died, I started to break out the ticket stubs, and I went looking from a 1976 ticket stub that my dad took me out to see Hank Aaron play. So I've been going through all these 1980s ticket stubs. Here's my 1975, only time I ever had a box seat, Maury, at Memorial Stadium. The Cleveland Indians were in town in the summer of 75. Whoo, man, baseball and nostalgia and all this and minor leagues getting eaten up and you can't go to the ballpark. Baseball's in a spot right now in a lot of ways, not just in Baltimore, and really trying to find itself, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that obviously this year it's going to be obviously better than it was last year, which was you only had fans for the NLCS played in the new Texas Rangers Stadium, which was weird, right? I had to go over that. I'm like, that's right. We had the National League and an American League ballpark, and that's where
that we had never seen before, pretty much.
Yeah, right. And the World Series in a site-neutral location. Those options are still on the table for the 162-game season, which I think might affect Toronto. But I think you're going to see a lot of ballparks, Nestor, at 25% to start the season. Some at 20. Some will be at 0. In California and other places where they're still really fighting this thing, especially, Dodger Stadium where they've turned it into a COVID, vaccination.
I saw Oakland as well. On the news tonight, right. Literally, yeah.
So when you get into that, those places may start a little bit later. But I think you're obviously going to have fans, and as more people get vaccinated, you're going to start to see it. But it'll be an interesting season to see how this goes. A lot different than last time. In 2020, the thing caught me was baseball was the first one out of the gate. So when anybody got a COVID positive, it was like everybody freaked out. The season was going to end. How can you do this?
Well, if you remember the Marlins and the Cardinals early on, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and those – look, I'm not trying to diminish those things. We're still going to have a lot of doubleheaders. But if you look at how the NBA and the NHL and the NFL were, especially if you look at the NBA, it seems like we've got cancellations or postponements every 5 seconds, and you get numb. And I think that this will be much different for baseball this year. I think that will become more the norm. The players really wanted to get 162 in. Manfred wanted to move it out a month. The players said, why? Why are you doing this? It's not going to move the needle. There's not going to be enough people vaccinated to really make a difference at that point. So let's just go ahead and do this thing. And so, like I said, it'll be 162 games. You'll have some fans in there. And then hopefully by midsummer, maybe you start to see the numbers of attendance go up.
For all the years that you've been out in Portland, talking about baseball there and going up to Seattle and your affinity for the Bay Area and your background in baseball and sports, this particular shift for baseball in the last, let's just call it 10 years, okay? We can take it back to wherever you want off steroids and the Mitchell Report and all that other stuff. But just in the modern era, since Trout, okay, let's say, that there's been so much change in a sport that has literally everything's moved at a glacial pace. I mean, let's just start with the DH that came at 73. When we're a lifetime later for me, and we're just starting to see the NL maybe dabble in that, and interleague play came and there was heresy and they've added teams and why, like all of those things felt very glacial. Now all of a sudden we're playing 7-inning games at double headers and the analytics are in and that's the way it's going to be. And there's just been so much, and I'm not an old get off my lawn guy, Maury, right? But there's been a lot of change, and now there's the change of post-pandemic, right? That whatever this is going to be. And I think for a lot of these franchises, especially the struggling ones, so to speak, struggling, I mean, that's all relative when your asset's worth $1 billion, how much you're struggling, right? You and I are struggling. Our assets are not worth $1 billion, Maury. So I'm not going to call the Tampa Rays or the Oakland A's or even the Orioles struggling in any way. But there is the gate revenue part of this package. And more than that, there's the human touch that makes you a fan, keeps you a fan. Maury, you know my history as I hold up the only no-hitter ticket that I've ever had in my life for the Bud Smith no-hitter that I walked out of, by the way, I have this rich history with baseball, and I have all these ticket stubs, and these are just the stubs. These aren't even like the press passes and the plane rides and all that stuff that goes along with being a baseball lifer. But I don't know what's going to get me back, and I don't know what's going to get me back 8, 10, 20 times a year or a season ticket or to have the little orange pass or the silver pass where you pay sort of the stipend and you get to come and go as you want. There's all these different tiering things baseball's trying to do. But in my town, getting people to care about it again. Dude, that Fangraphs thing came out earlier today. They were given a 0.0. You know what I mean? At some point, the product matters. John Miller matters. Brooks Robinson matters. All of that matters in my town and my history and my last name and where I come from Venezuela. All of that matters, but they've lost me. And I don't know how they're going to get me back, certainly starting with better baseball, but on a global scale, there's just been so much change, I think, in a sport that has never welcomed change, and it's been sort of forced, which maybe that's a good thing 10 years from now for baseball when it's resurgent and all these things that I think you believe it will be. I sit on the other side of that as a guy that's invested my whole life in this that thinks over the next 20 years it's not going to get better here because I've witnessed the last 30.
Yeah, so there's a lot in that.
Sure, I'm sorry. I went a lot of
No.
I guess it started with 7-inning games and all of these things that they could never get anybody to agree to that are now being sort of forced.
Well, yeah, so that's COVID. So the reason that the 7-inning games are in that they're unscheduled, okay, that was for 2020 and 2021. And the reason they did that was the Players Association really wants to get 162 in. By giving Manfred still has unilateral power to cancel games. So remember they did that offer where they said, hey, we'll pay for 162 if you play 154. And that was a little misleading because the powers of the commissioner would still allow for cancellations based upon that. So it's like, hey, that doesn't matter. If you cut us a bunch of games out, then it won't matter. Hey, great, we get paid for 162, but if you cut this thing back to 150.
Well, this was still the union pushing this because the players wanted to play and make money.
Right. Yeah. So there is that. So
and the owners didn't want to play because they were going to lose money, literally.
Right. So the 7-inning doubleheaders are unscheduled to try and make up games if there are COVID outbreaks. Do they get back in the future? I don't know. The runner on second in extra innings? I don't know. The DH? Yeah. I think there's a good chance of that one. Now, if it's going to be traded for extra postseason teams, that's not going to happen. The Players Association is just adamant about it. But in terms of the change, Nestor, I mean, let's look back at the NBA or the NFL. I mean, there seems to be change every 5 seconds, and we just don't bat an eye. But it's baseball. It's supposed to be really stoic. And if you talk to people like John Thorne or other historians of the game, they will tell you that the game used to be a lot more fluid. For a while it was 7 innings, and then it was 13 innings, and the distance to the base paths were different. And then it froze up. Largely, starting around the 70s and the 80s.
Well, 68 kind of changed everything with the mound, right?
expansion in 68, 69. There was that rapid expansion.
Where steroids and 80 home runs a year was also like, but that was change that was designed in the game, allegedly, wink, wink, chicks dig the long ball. I'm talking about sort of legislated change. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, and so social media, I think, drives a lot of this, right? So the idea, I think, is worse than some of the actual implementation of it, right? I don't, I don't know whether. Well, let's pick on something that's a hotbed, right? If I stick a patch on a uniform or a decal on a helmet in baseball, it's like the freaking end of the world, right? People absolutely wig out.
Where soccer teams run around with their
right. Well, soccer teams are like the extreme. Everybody goes, "Oh, we're going to turn into soccer, or we're going to turn into NASCAR." Well, there's something in between. People did this with the NBA as well. Nobody talks about that with the NBA anymore. No one will talk about it in baseball.
Dude, I remember when the hockey rinks, when they put a Tim Hortons coffee cup on the sideboard. That was heresy back in the 80s, right?
So kind of shifting gears and how baseball has turned into this homogenous thing. I think that is the bigger problem, right? This is bringing you back, right? Where is the uniqueness of it? Whereas I'm not, purist. I'm not big on purity, right? Make it whatever makes it good. But when it becomes so damn homogenous that there's a naming right for everything, I've got a logo on the back of the mound. I'm going to now have in the minors, right? We did this complete restructuring of the minors, 120 teams. The divisions now, they got rid of like the Pacific Coast League. It's gone. So we now have like traditional division names, but those are going to be up for sale for naming rights. And they're just placeholders. And it's like, is everything got to be like this?
Well, everything's going to be for sale in the aftermath of this because they're running lower on revenue streams, right? Like, I mean, the Baltimore situation is such a mess, Maury, because it feels like 5 minutes ago that you and I were out there with Nair and my boy Bernie and knocking off some, Thai food and having fun in Portland. But, 4 years down the line, all of these $200 million a year revenue generators that Masson was for them for all those years, that's now dried up. They've now they fired Rick Dempsey. You know what I mean? And they don't ever do it well. And the Nationals are right down the street. And that's a really difficult concept, Maury, for someone in Lutherville or White Marsh in the northeast suburbs of Baltimore that doesn't really know much about the Nationals. They're on that channel that's next to the Orioles, but you never put them on. Nobody here cares about the Nationals at all. The Nationals might as well be playing in Montreal, like literally. Like it's just not something in the Baltimore vernacular, and yet it's such an incredibly important part of how this thing's going to be held together over the next 15 years.
Well, so this, I think, is the bigger problem with baseball. Irrespective of all the change, the biggest problem, Nestor, is what are we going to do about perennial tanking teams? Your Orioles, your Pirates. Okay, the Rays have showed that you can do it, right? It's not sustainable for very long. Your windows of competitiveness are not as long as certainly the Dodgers or the Yankees or the Red Sox. I mean, we know the usual suspects, right?
Well, the margin for error is also you right. Sign one Chris Davis and your franchise goes away for 5 years.
Right. So there is that, right? So there is that margin of error. But I think the problem is that when you start to get fans going, my team is just going to be sucking forever. Why the emotional investment? And there's the other flip side of this. We're looking at what the Cubs and the Red Sox have done, which is be really successful, and then let's dump everybody, get rid of Mookie Betts, dump half the dog, Yu Darvish go, watch everybody leave out of the Cubs.
Fan base there isn't accustomed to that.
Right. And I always equate that kind of thing to when the Marlins did it, which was so transparent, right? I equated it to a roller coaster ride, right? There's lots of ups and downs. And in the end, you get off it, you feel like you've been jerked around and nauseous. And that's how I think.
But Maury, I mean, you're an old guy like me. You remember when, Charlie was selling off Joe Rudy and Campy Campaneris and Billy Kuhn's got to get involved in that. And I remember the 93 All-Star game here when the Padres were doling off every Fred McGriff and that was considered a fire sale, and that was considered to be like, we're Major League Baseball. We don't do that, you know? And now it's a friggin' way of life, right? Like for a third of the franchises in the sport.
It's just, I think, a really bad method. And the Players Association, of course, doesn't like it. Because what it's largely about, Nestor, and this is the thing that bothers, I think, fans more than anything, those fans aren't stupid. So they go, oh, this is about the money, right? So I can't afford, or I can afford, but I don't want to spend money on veterans anymore. I can dump them and I can go pick up a bunch of prospects and some will stick, and we'll base everything about a youth movement, right? I mean,
well,
if you
Adam
go,
Jones would have been the best player on the Orioles last year, but he's playing over in Japan, having a good time,
right.
eating pretty good sushi, from what I understand.
But that idea that we're going to invest in the young new talent in baseball, right? I mean, Fernando Tatis Jr. is a prime example. At some point, the Padres will go, well, we got a good run out of the prospects that we got through draft, and and we stunk. And they'll likely unload him. Now, maybe they renew him because he's such a star player and is a bit transcendent. But the point of the matter is that I'm not, look, free agents should be free agents. But when you start just dumping and reloading and dumping and reloading and dumping and reloading, and then some of the teams are hanging around the bottom, and it's just not good baseball when you get to the point to where it's like, I know that the Pirates are going to suck. I know that the Orioles are going to suck.
Well, you've been going from Portland up to Seattle, which is not close, by the way, for 20 years. Everything fell apart after Randy Johnson and A-Rod, pretty much, right? Jay Buhner.
Yeah. So that was one of those rare instances. That was the only team where I could go, you know what, guys, you've tried everything. Why don't you blow it up and see what happens for once? That one I can kind of get. I don't understand the Red Sox doing it, getting rid of Mookie Betts. I didn't get it.
A lot of their dance was staying under the top number for the tax too, right? I mean,
there is that, right? But once you blow under, that's the other thing about the Dodgers I don't think a lot of people get. Like, the amount of luxury tax they're going to pay is a lot smaller than you might imagine because they dip back under the threshold. It resets the tax rate. And so in doing so, that means that they won't have to pay the tax rate as high as if they go multiple years. So the system at the top isn't the problem.
Well, it's being gamed by a bunch of lawyers and a bunch of eggheads from MIT, right? And that's just on the baseball side, for crying out loud.
That never bothered me. That really doesn't. I think that that's overblown. I really do have a problem with this idea that there are teams that are hanging around the bottom. That you should. I said this on Twitter, and I believe it. If you have a problem with the Dodgers spending like they are, more than you have a problem with the Pirates having a $30 million payroll, then you're doing this thing all wrong. The problem in baseball is not the top. The problem in baseball are laggards that are living off either their RSN money or their revenue sharing money or both. And I find that unconscionable. I don't understand how the Pirates live and die like this every year. I mean, to be a fan in Pittsburgh would suck. To be a fan in Baltimore would suck.
Oh, it does.
Off the ball. You just can't.
Maury's here. Maury Brown. You can find him at Bizball Maury. He's also out at Forbes. He's been a contributor and writer of the Baseball Writers Association. We can argue Hall of Fame and all of these other things, but we do need to get to rock and roll at some point. I just want to say this on the baseball side, and I think for all the sports, we're now a year into this thing. It's been a long time since I've had you on. I mean, I've been doing the Zoom video here for the better part of a year, so it has been a while since we checked in. The notion that sports has kept going, and, I know you're right about NASCAR, and, I'm involved in the NFL, and my town's an NFL town, and we're trying to figure out college basketball, and I've been searching for Terps and Big Ten guests this week and whatnot. But when this thing is over with sports and the business of sports and anything you used to know about RSNs and ESPN and, carriage rates and subs and all of this television lingo and mobile apps and what we're going to do, people's tastes are going to change, Maury. And I don't know that we can calculate it or can see it or know what it's going to be. But I am really worried for sports in general over the next 10 years and the value it's going to have and how people are going to invest in it in a way where people invested in the Orioles here 30 years ago because they loved Baltimore. It was provincial. It was tribal. It's what powered it. I'm not sure it's that powers professional sports anymore. I really don't. I think gambling does.
Yeah, gambling, and it's more of a corporate thing. That's, I think, the thing that bothers people. And the thing that kills me, right? Everybody looks at, so Rob Manfred, right? They're like, oh my God, I hate Rob Manfred. If you look at him in terms of who he represents and how he is, Adam Silver or Gary Bettman are cut from the exact same cloth. Bud Selig, right? Who we all went, Bud was great because, he had a big love for, all things Milwaukee and the Braves and Henry Aaron. He could tell all these great baseball stories. But underneath, I don't know whether Bud was any better than Rob Manfred. The difference is how sports is packaged now, that it's just so highly incorporated now that like I said, I think it just has become so homogenized.
Maury, and the plague has sort of opened this up for what it is, which is a cash grab, right? Like across the board, there's been nothing cozy about this plague for sports, I don't think.
No, and people are going to look at this situation with the pandemic and go, the owners are really taking it in the shorts. If you look at a 5-year rolling window, they made so much money, Nestor. All of them did.
It's felt very desperate to me over the last year, across all of it. I mean, even the Yankees and the Dodgers and, these big organizations, it's felt a little more desperate than it's felt prosperous for me during the plague. It's felt like we're going to do whatever they played games on Wednesday afternoons. They played games without quarterbacks, Maury. They played a game without quarterbacks and sanctioned it. I don't know. There's been a lot. They're playing 7-inning games, and, the Marlins put a minor league team here and beat the snot out of the Orioles, after being in a coma for a week and a half, right? Like, just crazy stuff's going on last year.
Well, and that is the other thing too, right? Like, how is everybody psychologically through this whole thing? Is it sports being done for the sake of getting through it? Just muscle through and put something out there that looks like sports, but it's like, no, are the players fully invested in it? There's no fans in the stands, really. It all has this weird gyration around health and safety protocols. It doesn't feel like the sport that we knew, which was everybody pack it in and all the wildness around it. I mean, we've seen it in like some of the football games that we've seen and some of the basketball games where everybody like charges the field. I mean, you get anxious about it. If you're like thinking about COVID, you get anxious. So your ability to watch sports with a crowd or to watch sports in general is completely skewed right now around the pandemic. And maybe that's it. Maybe the thing about it is that it's going to require us to get back to some sense of normalcy before we feel normal about how sports are again.
I miss music more, dude. And, I had your Shoot the Thrill out the other day. Every time I hear Shoot the Thrill now with AC/DC, I think of you and your cover band out there in the Pacific Northwest. But, I mean, the death of certain rock stars during this period of time. I mean, my Uncle Jimmy sent me the Springsteen AARP cover. He tear-sheeted it old school and sent it out to me. And, Springsteen and his television ads and the drinking and driving, all of that, right? But just the notion that the thing that would feel so normal to me would be out at Merriweather Post, out on the lawn, I don't know, pick any artist, Sheryl Crow, pick whoever you want, just a show where I could sit on the lawn. Cheap Trick was supposed to play last summer, just I could sit on the lawn and have a beer under the stars at Merriweather Post and have a band like yours play AC/DC songs for me. That's what I'm missing, and I know that juices you more than anything in your life.
Yeah, I mean, you're looking at me and people are like, how the hell is he playing an AC/DC tribute? So obviously I don't look like this when I play in it. But, yeah, it'll be 1 year Saturday since I've played a show. And when you've played for 20 years regularly, and then gone to I don't know how many concerts, Nestor.
It's a long way to the top when you want to rock and roll.
Yeah. When you have gone to as many shows and that becomes part of your life, to not have it's just look, man, I was just telling the wife, so I won't get into the particulars of it, but actually my wife and I fell into 1A in terms of the vaccinations. So we went out and got our first doses, and man, and we're going to get our second dose this Saturday. Once I start to gel in, like a couple weeks afterwards, man, as soon as that weather is there, I'm having a backdoor barbecue with other people that I know that have been vaccinated. As soon as you can socialize, I want to get there. Music, I have to figure
Get a
out.
plug in, right?
Well, I think there's a good chance that I play maybe at the end of the summer.
You've been
There's
playing? Has there been a month where you
no,
haven't played?
nope, I haven't. I played at home, woodshed at home, but no gigs, nothing. The
I
band
mean, but
hasn't.
are you playing? Do you pick the
Oh
guitar
yeah,
up once a week?
yeah. I mean, I'll sit at home and just, like I said, woodshed, just jam. But it's not the band hasn't gotten together in a year. I mean, we're not safe. We don't feel safe enough to do that, and that's the responsible thing to do. And we can't gig. I mean, there's no sense. I mean, you could, but it's not the same. I'm playing. There's a coast gig at a thing called Dune Fest, which is a big, like, dune buggies and ATVs and motocross at a huge place on the Oregon coast. Well, there'll be probably 10,000 people. That's the last weekend in July on the coast. That's about as safe as you're going to get, and as early as you can get. But indoor shows, I still got tickets for Rage Against the Machine and Ozzy, and I
I'm
don't know when
sitting on Stones tickets on my app. Pearl Jam, Pearl
Yeah,
Jam was coming here. Pearl Jam was the first thing that canceled, Maury. Last year, Pearl Jam canceled the whole tour before, like, Rudy Gobert by a couple of days, if you go back, right? And I was like, that was the thing I was so looking for. They were playing the Royal Farms Arena, 3 blocks from my house. My girl Jenny Jablonski had tickets, and, like, we were all set up. And it never happened. None of it happened. But by the way, you want a sad sports story? You're a Californian by birth. I had tickets for the Stones at the Murph. They were going to kick the tour off at the Murph. And I'm surfing around the other day, and I follow some people from San Diego. They've ripped the Murph down. Like, they've started to dismantle the Murph. So my boy Pete says, well, they canceled the Stones show at the Murph. And I'm like, well, why didn't they cancel the rest of the tour? And then I realized they ripped the Murph down. Like, they were playing football there like 8 weeks ago. I saw some freaking Holiday Bowl there. I was flipping around. I'm like, well, at least maybe one day I'll get to see Mick shake his ass at the Murph. I wonder what they did with the dog in the statue. I mean, seriously, Jack.
right. So, first of all, I have to make this clear. I was born in Oregon.
I thought you
Grew
were
up.
born in California.
Everybody will kill me if I say I'm not born in Oregon. Born in
Hold
pure.
on, but were you not raised in California, or am I missing a story?
No, I grew up in the Bay Area, man. Like, I was
Right, you always say to me, I grew up in the Bay Area, man. So that makes you a Californian to me, dude.
Yeah,
You know?
so technically, and it stuck with me. Grew up outside of Berkeley, the whole thing. Right? So, but no, man. I mean, that idea, shows and whatnot. I went to the last large concert in the well, there have been other ones, right? But I mean, the one before we all locked down, March 11th. It was the night of Rudy Gobert. I remember Mark Cuban looking at his cell phone and freaking out, right? When the NBA shut down. I was with 22,000 people at the sold-out Tool show at the Moda Center here in Portland. And
Wow.
canceled the rest of the show. So your show that you said, the Pearl Jam tour that was canceled before Rudy Gobert, this was the last concert. And I look at that picture now with 22,000 people, and I remember I was like, hey, you would see somebody and you would go, hey, bud, from a distance, right? No hugs, no, fist pumps, no. And they were like, everybody knew it was like weird. And then after that, it was all over. We all locked down, and that's been it.
If I would have known that last week was going to be locked down, I mean, I turned down a Hall & Oates show in Hershey because it was a night like this. It was February. It was 22 degrees. And I'm like, Hall & Oates is playing the Man in Philly, outdoor, overlooking the city on May 28th. My boy Toby's going to hook me up. We're going to go up to Philly. We're going to eat fat cheesesteaks and have some subs. Yeah. I'm still waiting on Hall & Oates. I mean, I'm listening to Rock and Soul Part 1 all over again. Maury Brown is here from Forbes and Bizball Maury, and covering the business of sports, and loves baseball and NASCAR and rock and roll. Anything on the rock and roll front that is of note to you? I mean, like, I've been listening to a lot of music the last year because that's all we do around the house. Obviously, I've been watching a lot of sports. I have somehow fallen into liking the band. Now, I was never a Dead fan, certainly not Jethro Tull, that early 70s Grand Funk sort of, war, the non-Zeppelin Who side, I guess the American side of some of it, the Bachman Turner Overdrive and those bands, it never was my thing. Maybe a little Sweet Little Willie won't. But the band was always like on that stoner edge of Dylan where I never swam there. It wasn't my thing. And lately I've been hearing band songs and I'm thinking, you know what? I've got to I'm trying to go back in a catalog or two and find, like, you love UFO. Makes me want to go back and listen to it a little bit more and hear some deep tracks. I feel that way about Deep Purple and Rainbow and a couple of those bands. There's music I haven't discovered. So instead of waiting for something to be made, I want to go find something old that I missed somehow,
Yeah. So here's something for you.
Okay.
John's, I think it's called Jewel Box. 9 hours and 23 minutes, Nestor. It's like he went through and found every demo he ever did. It's 123 tracks. It's insane. So if you want to go find old stuff, and there's Philadelphia Freedom's the only hit on there, but piano only version of Madman Across the Water, a bunch of stuff off of Rock the Wealthy, stuff that he did before he ever recorded his first album. So for older stuff, if you want to go dig through some of that stuff, that's
finding weird Billy Joel demos is easy on the web too. Yeah. They're all a little out of key, a little weird,
So that for old stuff was there. But in terms of the band, Robbie Robertson and that whole thing, Levon Helm, of course, it was something that I didn't really get into it, and I'm a product of the 70s, but it was one of those bands that I came to appreciate. I'm not a big Springsteen person. Everybody jokes that I shouldn't be allowed in the BBWAA because I don't worship at the foot of Bruce Springsteen. And I'm not kidding. I've listened to the Born to Run album once.
What?
And I lived through it. But Born to Run, I think, is a really good song. But
come on with Born to Run, man. I mean, you should be listening to Night. You should be listening to She's the One's the greatest song ever written. I mean, Springsteen has written songs in the last 20 years. You go to The Rising, and you're I don't know if you caught the inauguration, and he was a little cold out there in front of the reflecting, but Land of Hope and Dreams is one of the greatest songs ever written, Maury. I mean, don't come on this program and dog Springsteen because he blew an O2 on a motorcycle.
So my case of Always Run Heavier, I'm off listening to the Melvins, and everybody's you got to be out of your mind. I'm listening to my taste of Run Heavier. We've talked about this.
Yeah. But you're on that. You're on the edge. You're out here. Yeah.
We have to talk about this though. So I'm not saying
Rage, Rush, 9 Inch Nails, in that place, right? Yeah.
Heavier than that. It's Code Orange, and anyway. But this thing with Alex and Geddy getting back together, it won't be Rush. I think that they'll get I bet you they bring in 5 or 6 drummers and a bunch of maybe other players, another guitarist.
Well, they're not going to tour. I mean, Alex isn't there, right? This is going to be a project, right?
And I think that that's a good thing, right? I mean, I went back and listened to Lifeson's Victor album, which is 25 years old, and it's pretty cool, and that was with Les Claypool. And so, there's that's the thing that worries me about the pandemic. Young artists are going to, there's always the tragic, drug death, but some of these older artists don't have a heck of a lot of time left. And that's the thing that's different about our generation and those now that have come after than our parents' generation. The idea that you could have, imagine Frank Sinatra being relevant 40 years. He wasn't. I mean, their windows were never the same. And so this idea of bands or looking at somebody like Ozzy or going to see Judas Priest or whatever it is, I mean, there's still some relevancy,
Halford's coming on a show this month, so I'm really excited about that.
Alex?
Rob Halford.
Oh, so, first of all, he's freaking amazing. But, I mean, I went and saw Priest, what was it, year and a half ago? Sounded as good as ever.
I saw them at Anthem with Saxon. They were unbelievable.
That was the tour.
Yeah.
And so, but the idea that these artists continue to go ahead and play look, yeah, everybody's getting older, but it's that idea that they're still fairly relevant. They're still pushing stuff out. I mean,
Maury, does
there's
a Rush
a lot
story
of
make you sad? Like, I haven't seen the DVD yet, the last one, and and Neil hadn't died at that point, right? I've
no, I
heard the last video is almost dark, and I have such an incredible memory of flying out to Chicago. I flew to Chicago the night before the tour started, the baseball tour. I was 15. I saw them in Chicago. The Stanley Cup was still going on, and then I began my baseball tour. I hung out with you a couple of weeks later. And well, no, I hung out with you the following year. It was a U2 thing I did. But I was in Seattle with Phil Gordon. I went to a Mariners game. But that summer they played, and I had a chance to go out to the Forum at the end, but I had been traveling all summer, literally 30 days. So I didn't go, and I'm okay with walking out of that arena in Chicago, United Center that night, having seen them for the last time. But the stories that, and I've invited Brian Hyatt from Rolling Stone on the program, the stories of Geddy and Alex talking about Neil and the end, I mean, it's made me cry. Like, like in a way that I found my pics recently and my autographs, and Neil signed, a flat for me once, and pictures with Geddy and all that. Geddy coming on the show. I found all that stuff. But the notion that they've lost the heart and soul of the band, I mean, the guy that wrote all the songs, the guy that wrote the words, that they're going to get in a room at 70 years of age to create something without him. I'm not saying good, bad. God bless them if they do it, and I will consume it. But it's something you really didn't think about when you spun that Signals album back 40 years ago when you got it, right? Like how the story would play out for all of these bands.
Well, and that's it, right? So think of what's potentially being robbed due to the pandemic with some of these artists. Like the idea of like, Ozzy just seems to be like hanging on. Everybody has a run, right? I mean, everybody, God bless. I mean, how he lived as long as he has is, a bit of it's a mystery, right? Or Keith Richards or anybody like that. But you sit there and you go, if you're like, I don't know about you, man, but I thought that the last Rush album was some of the best material they had written. I think some of it holds up as well as some of the stuff that they did in the 70s. And so that to me speaks to a relevancy that you still have. And so you wonder, right, like how many artists are we going to lose? How much time is being missed? How many tours? Like I go now, I'm like, I better go see them while I can. And
I absolutely feel that way.
Well, and that's also the other reason why I've never hung my hat on just like, my music from my age is the only thing. I can't do it. I got to go find new music because eventually my artists that I liked, they burn out and fade away, right? I mean, or whatever, however you want to describe it. So
that's like a Def Leppard song.
It sounds like, or Neil Young, or right. But that idea of being able to see those bands while you can, I worry about that. Like, am I going to get to see Ozzy? Like, I missed Elton John. I was like, I never got to see him live. I regret that. That's one of the biggest regrets I ever had. So, I mean, I miss Zeppelin because I couldn't make it to Seattle, right, when I was a kid. But that,
that
other
poor
artists,
Fish.
I've seen Fish. I don't know.
No. The Fish in Seattle.
Oh.
Robert Plant. Yeah, come on, man. I mean, come on. I read books about this stuff, Maury Brown. Maury's here from Forbes. I guess the last thing on Rush that I'll say, because you've taken me into a little bit of a rabbit hole, and I will let you go, is that in reading about Neil and knowing his whole life, his privacy issues and limelight and living on a lighted stage and all of that stuff, the notion that if anyone knew he was dying, they would descend upon his home in Santa Monica, where he lived. No one knew he lived in Santa Monica, right? And that they would have been singing Closer to the Heart out of his window, and that would have, like, at that point, I had to put the story down and say, I got to get up and get a drink here, and the notion about all of that. But watching Linda Ronstadt, right? Watching Glenn Campbell, seeing where Neil Diamond is right now, knowing that Eric Clapton has, I mean, I'm just naming people on not the disabled list, literally almost a dementia, like a different, they're not going to come back. And watching that, like the Glenn Campbell thing, I know it was all sort of captured. Man, that's going to be a difficult thing to watch, right?
Well, getting old sucks, Nestor.
Oh, there's no doubt about it. I'm learning that.
There is that. I think one of the things about, once again, is if go back and think about, so Sabbath started in 68? And I go and listen to Sabbath, and then like there's a whole, subgenre in the desert rock, stoner rock thing that mirrors an awful lot of what early Black Sabbath sounded like. So there's still some relevancy to that thing. So you go, well, the distance there, well, 1968 to now, like if you went and took that amount of time and then went backwards to think of, that would be like Benny Goodman being relevant in 1980. And the idea of that, we just go, the rock has been able to remain relevant as a music style for so long. Now, granted, it's faded a little bit. I mean, it's like the Foo Fighters seem to be like the last true rock stars, right? Jack White, maybe. But that idea, that kind of like weirds you out when you go, gosh, we never did that with Frank Sinatra.
Well, when you think there is no next, as I hold up these baseball tickets to think, what's going to jazz me the next 40 years of my life if I live that long?
Right.
That's going to make me feel as good as this ticket did in 1991 when I got to see Oral Hershiser pitch at the Vet. You know what I mean?
Well, man, there's a lot of great, for people that are into concerts, man, don't live in your comfort zone. That's what I love about Spotify. Go down the rabbit hole, go find new music, go see something new.
I went to see Slightly Stupid 2 summers ago. A buddy of mine invited me. Had a great time. Didn't know any of the music or whatever, but just a good time, and
right.
I would go see him again because I didn't know much about him, but it was dancey and fun, and it was good. My wife and I have gotten a little bit into sort of Black Pumas and Duran Jones in the indications, a couple of those sort of throwback, sweet soul, Marvin Gaye, Smokey Robinson sort of sound that we like,
Yeah, I mean, artists that sound old but are newer, like Father John Misty is one that I kind of like because it kind of reminds me of Elton John. Certainly Kravitz, although he's obviously been around for a long time now, had that whole 70s vibe to him.
What about those kids with the hair that sound like Geddy Lee getting attacked and Robert Plant? That's a terrible. What's that?
And that's terrible. That's like,
what's that name of that?
Greta Van Fleet.
Oh my God.
So, and look, I'm not opposed to bands that kind of, there were bands that all kind of sounded the same. Like Triumph, in a lot of ways, reminded me of Rush.
Don't talk bad about Rick Emmett now. Come on.
Great. I'm just saying that they were very, they sounded kind of similar. And there was
I would tell you to hold on. No.
There was a band called Starcastle out of the 70s that sounded exactly like Yes. Right? I mean, the labels did this thing. They're like, hey, find something good and kind of go. But now Triumph was obviously not Rush, but they were great. I mean, they still are great.
I'm fighting a good fight with you right now. Right. I am.
There are still bands, though, that are trying to rekindle a type of style, but there's a lot of new music. Go see Baron. So here's a progressive rock / metal band. Go out and see Baroness. Or go out, if you want to see something older bluesy that's not old, go see Clutch. Or something, like that. I mean, there's a lot of.
By the way, you want to see something good? Go see Marcus King, the Marcus King Band.
There you go.
I went to see the Marcus King Band. Changed my life last year over at Soundstage. It was fantastic. So I'm not, I can't go out every night like I used to when I was a youngin', Maury. But I have got you've sparked me. I'm taking notes over here, Barry. I'm going to go back and figure all this out and be Spotifying. Hey, man, I love having you on. I miss you. I'm sorry I haven't been to Portland, and sorry we haven't been to a ball game, a concert, none of that stuff. But I always appreciate you making time and coming on the show.
Nestor, you got a good excuse that we're in a pandemic. Hey, but pretty soon we're all going to be vaccinated and travel, and life's going to be beautiful again.
I'll be back out on the best coast. All right. Bizball Maury is the way to find him. He's at Forbes. He covers baseball better than anyone, NASCAR, and will play you some AC/DC anytime you want to hear it. And that's without Axl Rose in the band, although you would accept him in your band, right?
Yeah, man. All right, man. You take care of yourself. It's great to see you, Nestor.
Always a pleasure. Maury Brown out on the West Coast in Portland, Oregon. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. We never stop talking Rush, rock and roll, baseball, sports, and Baltimore positive.